Good. And they were, basically without this little case there, like, please don't forget about this.
And I think like we were muted, are we? Oh, we're not. Oh, not muted. We're not. Fantastic.
This one, right, acknowledge. So it was good. It was really, and yeah, it went very well. I felt like it was, it could have been an input for the town, but really everything was positive.
Hi, everybody. We're gonna get started.
Right.
6:31. Welcome. My name is Jessica Gordon. I am the chair of the Reed Field Comprehensive Plan Committee, and this is our last public meeting to present the plan, the purpose of the plan, what it's all about, and let people have a chance to ask questions and make comments. I think what I'm going to do is have us do our presentation. We've got a bunch of slides to go through, and then when we're done, we'll open up the floor for comments and questions. And I know there's a bunch of people online as well, so we'll be watching the chat. If you've got questions or if you can't hear for any reason, please let us know. Do you want to share the PowerPoint so we can get started? Thank you, Jessica. I'm off the thing. Just wait down there. Yeah, I'd have to go live. So what I think you have to do is share the screen first and then go to that, because you won't be able to. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Keep trying.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would be glad to.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget when we get some.
Sorry, thank you for your patience as we work through the technical issues. Okay, yeah, so welcome. We have been working on this plan now for over 2 years, so we're excited to be able to present it. I hope everybody's had a chance to look at it online on our website. If you click to the next slide, our agenda for this evening, I'll be sort of walking us through the introduction, what the purpose of the plan is, why a plan, all of that. We'll talk a little bit about the public survey results. Eric will help with that. There'll be a section where we'll talk about parts of the plan that have very few changes, things that have really changed very little from 2009 plan. Moving into land, water, and rural economic resources, which is a big chunk. Community profile, local economy and housing. And then the once and future land use section that Paula will be sort of helping lead. Slide. All right, so what is the purpose of a comp plan? In general, they tend to be general because it is a broad scope. It's an overview of where we've been, where we are now, and where we as a community are heading. It's a roadmap of possible things that the town could be involved in over the next 10 years that include goals and strategies that are aligned with the other parts of our governmental plans, whether that's the land use plan or other plans that the select board comes up with. It is consistent with those plans. We want this plan to align with all the other goals that the other parts of the town have come up with. Having a comprehensive plan ensures consistency on the behalf of our local and regional levels so that we are, always pursuing the goals that sort of the citizens have said that they want us to focus on. And since it's so broad, everything from zoning to ordinance rewrites, land acquisition, all of this will be connected back to the plan, but will always be sort of part of a larger conversation that the select board has going to votes for anything that costs money for the town. Since it's ultimately a cumulative effort, we get data from a lot of places, including the census, from residents, town officials, business owners, volunteer organizations, developers, and more. It represents far more than just recommendations and a compilation of data. It really is sort of a shared story of what our town is and what we want to see for it. Next slide, please. So the basics of every comprehensive plan, not just ours, but they have sort of a bunch of things in common. One is it's going to be very data heavy. There's going to be a lot of data from town sources, from the state. We got a lot of census numbers. That stuff came in pretty recently. It's going to have things like a review of the current policies and ordinances that are in place at the moment. It's going to review things like community issues that are happening right now, things that the town is focused on at the moment. It's based on input from the residents, so you're going to see some information about those survey results coming up, town-specific data, and then trends in the community and region, because Reedfield is not an island. We are connected to our local communities, our county, our state. The development of the plan encourages and relies on discussion from the community. We've reached out to many community members during this process to get their input. And the document will guide the town in the next 10 years by providing a snapshot in time of where we are right now, as well as helping to determine what the path forward might look like by creating those goals and policies and strategies. So what are the benefits of having a comprehensive plan? One, it helps us to analyze what the conditions are right now and what the trends that are emerging might be. So it illustrates a plan for future development and conservation based on the data that we have, the best data at the moment. It provides strategies for sustainability and recommends steps for implementation. So the ways that we want to move forward sustainably, we come up with ideas and goals and ways that we might do that. It serves as a foundation for public policy and future land use decisions, because we can refer back to this plan and the ways that we've been talking and thinking about how we want to move forward as a town. And it identifies fiscally and environmentally appropriate areas for future growth and investment. And why have a comprehensive plan? Why does it matter that we have one? I think the big reason is it's required by state law. So since the Growth Management Act of 1988, that's been required. Communities in Maine have been creating land use plans since the early 1900s. They've been an integral part of the state structure of land use and zoning since the 1940s. There's incentives that are only available to communities with certified comprehensive plans, and that includes enacting legitimate zoning, impact fees, and rate of growth ordinances. They guide state growth capital investments towards designated growth areas. They require state agencies to comply with our local zoning standards, which I think is an important one. They help us qualify for things like Site Location Development Act exemptions for certain growth area developments. And yes. I was hoping we'd maybe make questions towards the end, but if you've got something burning right now.
I heard a concern about this, because I just saw the ordinance worded. I heard a concern for more than what is the relationship of the plan to any other conceivable ordinance?
This plan is a guide that shows a path that has been sort of with input from community members, hopefully shows a path forward that we can all come to an agreement on, but no ordinances come out of this plan. Any ordinances that would follow would come from the select board. and other, the regular way that laws and ordinances are made in the community. There's no teeth to a comprehensive plan. There's nothing that forces anybody to pursue any particular goal or policy in the plan. Does that answer the question?
Well, the slide said enact legitimate zoning impact fees and rate of growth ordinance.
So what that means is with a comprehensive plan, it allows us to do that. That not, without a comprehensive plan, it is harder to enact those things because we don't have that guiding document. Matt?
Right, and I'd say, to clarify, in order to have a zoning ordinance, you have to have a comprehensive plan. It is the foundation for a zoning ordinance.
So that's
It's
basically about it.
Recording in progress.
it's, what do you mean about it in terms of ordinances?
Other than that, I mean, is it the source of any other ordinances?
It's a guiding document for any other ordinances. Sure, if there's something that might come up, an ordinance that the community might decide it wants to adopt, it would certainly be best that it's consistent with the comprehensive plan, that it's not contrary or contradictory to the comprehensive plan.
Okay. Thank you.
What else do we get? Oh, we can qualify for authority to issue natural resources protection and site location development permits. And we can qualify for relaxed Maine DOT traffic permit standards for certain growth area development. So it allows us some flexibility in terms of state ordinances, what we're allowed to do if we have a comprehensive plan. We also will receive priority for certain grants and funding options with an established comprehensive plan. So, you know, there's money on the table when you have one of these for sure. And I think we'll be moving into. Oh, yes. So this is the vision statement that the committee came up with, again, based on feedback from citizens. The town of Reedfield is a scenic, dynamic, and diverse community committed to fostering an inclusive, vibrant way of life for people of all backgrounds and ages. This vision commits to preserving the rural character of our community with a plan for a sustainable future. So sort of a broad vision. Yes. Thank you. And then these are the main topic areas that are covered by the comprehensive plan in the chapters of that plan. You've got your historical, archaeological, cultural resources, a community profile, a chapter on local economy, housing, public facilities and services, transportation, recreation, rural economic resources, natural and water resources, fiscal capacity, existing land use, and future land use. And those align with the chapter, almost exactly with what I think we split one chapter into two, the rural resources and natural water.
Water and natural.
Yeah, it used to be two and now one, but pretty much aligns with the 2009 plan. It's my show. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm Eric Darrell, I'm the Reedfield Town Manager, and now we'll be talking about the survey process that we went through, some of the results, just a few of the responses and some of the interesting facts that came out of that. We had, I think, a very good process. We reached a lot of people in a few different ways. And you know, some things were surprising, some things weren't, but I'll get into more detail on that as we get into it. But I do want to start off by thanking the committee for their work in getting us to this point, and the public, of course, for all the input that we've received. Hundreds and hundreds of individual responses and comments, and a lot of good information came forward. So the survey is just a convenient way to get information from people that don't all come to meetings. It can be a great way to hear from someone that maybe just stopped by the library or the town office, or had 15 minutes while they were waiting for a dentist appointment for their kid or something. It's that kind of outreach that's very helpful, and it's typically available, at least with the online version, at their convenience. So it gives a few different ways to hear from residents. We did work on 3 different surveys to try to get a better understanding what it was we were looking at and what people were interested in. A lot of the survey questions actually reflected some of the topics discussed in the chapters, and I'll talk about those a little bit more later. We had a short survey that was paper form, intended really to get a very quick 5-minute, 10-minute response, and portable, something that someone who doesn't use a computer might be able to quickly fill out. But the long form survey, which actually was probably 45 questions as opposed to about 12 for the short form, it was online. And we wanted to get more information. We looked at getting demographic information, information that would help corroborate the answers to the questions and try to give a little bit of validity to those. And I'll talk about that later. And then we had a business survey, intended to get some basic information from businesses. Again, a short survey with just some basic information about really what businesses wanted to see in town. And we had a fairly low response rate for that, but that's, I can talk about that at the end of the slide. These were designed to help us understand the community perspective. It wasn't designed to be a scientific survey. We didn't pay anybody to come up with special questions. We did use a survey collection tool called SurveyMonkey, which the town has had an account with for a few years now. And that does help with the collection and analysis of the information. And then taken together, we reached over 11% of the adult population. We had an original target of 10%. So we exceeded our target, and that for a voluntary government survey is a very good response rate. So of the adults over 18, which was really what we were looking for a target audience, we did okay. The short form survey, we got 67 responses. We got 168 on the long form survey. And then the business survey, we got 8 responses. So next slide. Again, a good target was 10% for the surveys. The online survey data offered some insight and helped us understand that that what we were hearing from residents represented more than just that small group of people who responded. That's something you do with survey data, is kind of try to corroborate it. And we found that the people who responded to the survey were evenly distributed around town. So we had folks from Reedfield Corner, from Plains Road, from Kents Hill, from the lakes, all over. And 87% of respondents were residents that lived in the town for 3 years or more. And we had a big chunk that were residents for 10 plus years. So that was really positive to see. And 93% of respondents were from year-round property owning households. So we feel that the type of people that were responding, the distribution of people, fairly reflects the community. We also looked at the household makeup of the respondents. So we know from the US Census that we have a certain shape to our community demographics, and that we would expect a lot of responses from folks over 65, and maybe less from folks in their 20s, for example, because that's how our population looks. So we wanted to compare our survey results to that data, and we came pretty close. We did see that over 36% of respondents were retired, and over 65 demographic was somewhat overrepresented in our survey response. We did see that we had a few more of those folks taking the time to fill out the survey. And the 25 to 35 age group was a little bit underrepresented. And with many things, we did see some differences of opinion and some things that were actually contradictory. That's expected when you have public debate and public feedback, that not everything's going to line up the way you expect it would. So the next slide, please. This graph shows the blue bars and the blue line shows our actual demographic makeup. The bars are probably more accurate. The line is just kind of a smooth representation. What you see is, as I said, that 25 to 35 group, in the middle of that chart, there's a bump on our actual census data. Below, it's flat, and that shows that we didn't have the representation that we would have liked. We still had fair representation, but it wasn't a real close match to what we wanted. And then again, the over 65 crowd is a little bit overrepresented in the red bar, but then the blue. And so we saw a few more responses that way. So just going into this, we should be aware that there were some differences between who was responding and what we actually would expect from a perfect representation. Next slide. The community survey questions were generated and pointed towards addressing several key topics. And again, they line up with the chapters, with the areas of focus that we've heard from residents that people want to talk about, and also some of the things that are required for the comprehensive plan. Demographics and resident information, community character and identity, housing and transportation, town spending priorities and community services, existing and future development and land use, businesses and economic development, natural resources and open space, recreation and community activities, and then likes and dislikes about Wheatfield. And that last part I think is important because we did ask several open-ended questions on both surveys where we tried to get those, what do people want to see in Wheatfield in 10 years? Or what would they appreciate now that was done 10 years ago? Questions like that really do help give people opportunity to give feedback that's unfiltered and isn't constrained to a multiple choice question. So we got some great responses from those. And I will say that when I looked at the questions that were about what do people really want for the future of Wheatfield, that vision, a lot of the language really matched pretty closely with what we saw in the vision statement that was put forward for this plan. The rural residential character, the natural resources, protecting what we have, not changing much unless we think about it carefully, being conservative with the spending, all those things were, it really matched, I think, the vision that we've seen. So I'll move on to the next slide and talk about general survey results. People really identified with the fact that our schools, our low population density, our rural character, things like that were really why they lived in Wheatfield, why they made it their home. And when we looked at the survey questions, there was a lot of consistency between that initial position and statement that we got from residents about what they value and how they responded to the questions. So that made me feel good about the fact that that people were being consistent. And again, there was definitely some conflict in there, but we had some good responses. The open-ended questions were well received. I talked a little bit about those and how much value those had. Pretty much everybody took time to write something there. And that to me says that they weren't just checking boxes. They were taking the time to say, here's how I feel about this. Here's what I want you to know. And a lot of that information came through very, very clearly. People do want peace and quiet in town. They want that quiet character. They want that physically in the way that the properties and the way their lives are structured. And they also want it politically. There was some difference of opinion about what the cause of maybe some lack of peace might be in the community. But the good thing is people talked about it, and it's all there on the record. And I think it was incorporated into some of the priorities that we saw on the comp plan. The spending piece was interesting. Taxes were identified as a key concern, but so were maintaining quality public service. People wanted to make sure that we were taking care of our older residents. They wanted to make sure the roads were taken care of. They wanted to make sure the schools were adequately funded, but there was, chatter about, of course, town spending and school spending. But when we put a question out about a scale of 1 to 100 or 0 to 100, where is the town? Are we spending too much or too little? The average answer was 51. if there was something terribly wrong, one way or the other, we probably would have seen a little bit more difference, but I think in general, people were on average, right, happy. When you looked at the individual responses, there were some very strong polar opinions about what we should be spending money on, but overall, people, it averaged out. And then communication, we asked about, how should the town be communicating with residents? Again, both paper and online surveys. And the responses really said that paper is still important, but people really are looking more towards the email lists and the website as a prime means of getting information and communicating back and forth. So that was really key. And then one more time, there were a lot of varying opinions. Some were polar, and some of that even was reflected in the aggregate. We had some people that answered questions, I won't say differently, but I'll talk about one in a few slides where we got almost exact opposite answers, but there might be a reason for it. And then it's really important to note that all of this information is fully available. It's public. It's on the website. Every single survey response is up there that we had. We data entered manually. Thank you to Holly Lumlow, who had done the data entry for us. All of the paper surveys so that we could actually have that data on a form we could work with. So that was fantastic. All on the town website. Next slide, please. So just quickly, I'll start with housing. Housing came out as a particularly important issue for residents. There was a lot of discussion about it. People want their kids to be able to live here if their kids want to live here. They also want to have housing be affordable for them now, but also in the future when they want to downsize. Housing stock was talked about a lot, and what we need. And I kind of wanted to focus on some of the highlights, but more than 50% of respondents supported elderly housing and accessory units. They wanted to see in-law apartments, right? And they wanted to see elderly housing. Those were big winners. People really liked those ideas. But at the same time, more than 50% of residents also were opposed to higher density development and smaller lot sizes. And it's tricky because two of the really easy ways to get housing to be more affordable is density and smaller lot sizes, and maybe smaller housing types like prefab buildings and small homes. So there's a little bit of contradiction in there, but it doesn't mean that we can't look at all of this, and it's a key indicator to us that we want to spend more time thinking about talking about housing. And then the next point is 54% of respondents oppose town involvement in spending, with only 36% supporting. And this graphic, I think it's important because it points out that people really want these issues to be discussed. It was a top priority on question after question. But when it comes to should the town be involved, people said no.
What was that question?
It was question 12 about whether or not there should be town tax dollars spent on affordable housing, right? So that's a really important piece, and that comes through in other survey responses, and that's why it's important for elected officials to look at this stuff carefully, and the public, because it is a little bit nuanced, but there are some really important messages. Next slide, please. Land use, this was a big one. We had several questions about it. 42% of respondents felt that there had been the right amount of development in Reedfield, with 34% not really having an opinion. And that makes up a big chunk. I think it's not 50%, but it's probably a pretty strong plurality that says things have been okay for the most part. And that was reflected in other questions, that kind of sentiment. 37% of respondents felt that the size, lot size should be kept the same. 57, while 15% on either side said more or less. So that is a really strong indication that we've got some feathering on the edges and a real big point in the middle that says, let's leave things the way they are. And so that we heard that even at the public hearings. People want those lot sizes to be kept the way they are, and that's a strong message to anybody involved in land use. 85% of respondents felt that agriculture and single-family housing should be encouraged, and those were two separate questions. but it shows that single family households, small, not apartments, not condominiums, those things were not popular. But single family households, agriculture, things that we want to protect and maintain. And then no uses were really strongly indicated to be discouraged or absolutely rejected, other than perhaps heavy duty industrial and heavy duty commercial activity. People don't want large manufacturing facilities or really solar farms to some extent, which was interesting.
Hey, Eric,
Yeah,
quick question.
sure.
I think I know the answer, but we didn't do any outreach in terms of informing these questions.
I mean, we worked with the boards and committees to help kind of get an idea of what questions they might like to see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, yeah.
One of the things as far as lot sizes go, I don't know what normal lot size should be. And so that would have been good information to say this is what the current ruling is or whatever. And so people would see that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And people do see when they drive around, they kind of get an idea, right? But that's not to say that we couldn't have more information available for that.
What is the smallest lot size?
Oh,
Land area?
well, it depends. I think it's two acres in the village, is that right? 2 acre minimum? Or is it
Yeah.
down to 1 now?
It's, I think it's one, like in the village and then two outside.
2 outside the village. Okay, yeah. But the fact that people answer that, and only 15% on either side, it shows a very strong perception, whatever it's based on, that they want things to stay the same, right? The other areas that weren't really popular were tourism, municipal facilities. People don't want to see more towns built. Marine uses, those are the things people said should be limited, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk specifically about businesses. And it's notable that respondents supported light industrial uses more than light commercial uses. But even light commercial and light industrial activities, people were a little bit hesitant about. They wanted to approach it carefully. They didn't want to jump into anything. Did you have a question, Dave, or just?
No.
Okay, yeah, no worries, yeah. And then that really carried through a lot of the questions. People want to see economic growth and development, but they want to see it happen slowly and in a way that doesn't harm the community. Next slide, please. Let's see. Use one more. Okay. So this question I thought was interesting about existing residential areas being rezoned for commercial. People, again, were consistent. They don't want to see things change. And they want, even though they want to see economic growth, they don't want to see changes in zoning necessarily. At least that's the indication we got from this question. People don't, I don't think, want to see conflict between residential and commercial uses. And that goes back to the idea of peace and quiet, right? The next slide, please. We'll move on to natural resources and open space. And there are 3 slides that I want to show because they're interesting. They kind of speak to different priorities in the community. I don't have any percentages really on this stuff, other than to say that natural resources and open space were very well supported and identified as priorities. And open space isn't just conservation land, it's farmland, it's recreational fields and trails and things like that. It's areas that are wetlands that are basically not buildable. So those are things that are open space. It's not just land that's in conservation. And we did kind of clarify that a little bit in one of these questions. But so this question was, do you feel there are any specific natural resource areas in Reedfield that should be preserved? Overwhelmingly, people said yes. There are things in Reedfield that are special that I think are important, and they even mentioned some of those in the open-ended question that followed. Identified areas like the area out behind Tingley Brook, behind the high school, or some of the ridges off of Sturtevant Hill, where you have elevated wetlands, or the view. I mean, the view areas, people really want to maintain some of the character of the community through view sheds. But that's just one indicator there. Next slide, please. And then we had a question about open space. and we did have a description just similar to what I just gave about what it actually kind of really includes. And people felt generally that we have enough open space. So that was interesting because they identified areas they said, we want to protect certain areas in town, but we also think that we want to, that we have enough. So I'm not sure what that exactly indicates. But I think that the next slide might give us an idea of what, and I guess also on that, there's a large group of people that said, we don't really know, we don't have an opinion. So that's interesting as well. But so the next slide talks about should we use taxpayer money to support open space preservation in town? It was close, but a majority of people said yes, which is interesting because that seems a little bit at odds with the question about do we have enough open space? So what I wanted to point out with these 3 slides is that this is a complicated discussion, complicated points, and people might feel differently about spending tax dollars than they do about preserving land for conservation, than they do about making sure that we have farms that are in farm preservation so we can maintain that for posterity. So I just wanted to point out that it's a complicated issue, and there are a number of other questions that were asked about this. So it's worth looking at those because it really is an interesting question. Moving on to the next slide, we'll talk about, let's see what's next here. Economic development. And I'm going to go through a few pieces, things that were well supported, things that people had neutral feelings about, and things that residents felt less supportive of. I don't want to say that people were, against that last group, but there was more people said they were not in favor of it than were in favor of it in most cases. So things that had overwhelming support: food and grocery stores, cafe, bakery, and restaurants, agricultural businesses, and gas stations. I mean, you could take that list of 4 or 5 things, and everybody that said these are my top priorities had 2 or 3 of those in their top priority list. And you'll know they're all fairly low impact things that might have a big impact on quality of life, but a small impact overall. The things that were neutral might be a little bit more impactful: hardware stores, pharmacy and medical offices. These are some of the take it or leave it things that really we have in Augusta or Winthrop or Manchester, but people might like it a little bit closer, but not necessarily if it brings in more traffic and issues. The things that in the favorable list are things that have to do, I think, more with community identity. What are we about? And what do we really need? Gas stations, one of them. I've heard that for years in town. Moving on to more of the things that are neutral: personal services, marine and water related uses. We had a discussion with the select board with some residents, summer residents, over the last couple of years about moorings. And they were really interested in that, but it seems like most people in town aren't too, they're not on fire about it. So that's an interesting point. And then light manufacturing and office space, those things were neutral. Things that folks didn't necessarily support were clothing and furniture stores. Just those things: automotive and self-storage facilities, event centers, cannabis stores. The 2 things that came up most often that people weren't really looking for: they don't want more self-storage and they don't want more cannabis stores. And then Airbnbs and vacation rentals. That does jive with the idea that tourism, people were neutral about it. They're not really excited about it, but they know it's an important part of the economy. And then solar farms. People don't want to see any more solar farms. And I can see why. I mean, that view on the top of the hill by Plains Road 41 will never be the same. It's probably better than condominiums, but people don't really like solar farms. So that's the economic development piece. Next slide, please. Public facilities and services. We had a big winner. It was astronomical, the number of people that said the fire department was a huge top priority for them and their most valuable public service. So no surprise there. The next several were kind of closer, but really solid waste came in as another essential public service. And then trails and conservation after that. which kind of lines up with the quality of life things that people mentioned. Maintaining the public beach was a top priority among respondents in a couple of questions. Mostly around amenities related to recreation, but also people really like the idea that we have this beautiful gem in the heart of town. They talk about it, they appreciate it. They really appreciate the fact that it's open to everybody in town. It's not free, you pay taxes to support it, but then you don't have to pay $40. You pay less than that if you use it, because now the cost is shared amongst everybody in town, and the summer people on the lake maybe don't use it. So that people like that idea. And then policing was really not a priority. I was surprised by that. That was one thing that I was a little bit surprised by. People complain with very good reason about traffic and speeding and congestion in certain parts of town, Main Street being one of them. And people just said pretty strongly that policing wasn't something that they were interested in. I mean, that graph, it's to me, it's stunning, considering the issue you have with speeding, but people just don't want more law enforcement in town, at least with this question, the way it was asked. EMS services, and this is another one where we had some contradiction. The paper question, the paper survey, people said, yes, we are interested in EMS services. With the online survey, it was the opposite. People said, no, we're good. And I think it might have been due to the way the question was asked. The paper question said, do we want to work with, improve EMS to make response times better? That's an pretty easy yes. We want better response time. The question on the online survey was really said, do we want to have more EMS service? And so when you look at it in that respect, you can see how those little differences in wording make a difference in the responses. But also it shows that, again, these are all complicated issues. And people, if I had to kind of amalgamate those things, probably want to get better service from our current providers. And that's a good message. Next slide, please. Survey results on transportation. 83% of respondents are satisfied with the network of town roads, 12% are not, and 5% had no opinion. Those low no opinion results are a good sign that people had strong opinions. And the fact that 83% of people really were strongly in support of the road network that we have and how it's being maintained, that's a good thing. When we asked more detailed questions, we did have a little bit different response. As far as future transportation and things that are very important, people said snow removal, very important. Sidewalks in the village area is 23%. Again, this is only of the very important category, not the mildly important, somewhat important, or unimportant. Those are all available on the website, but these are just interesting points. 19% said the transportation for those with limited mobility was important. 7% said paving publicly owned roads. So we're starting to understand, maybe that's not something we want to get into. And then 5% with public transportation, things like buses and shuttles, and that jives with what we hear regularly. And then I thought it was 0% said that not a single person said that we should be building more town roads. So I was happy to hear that, but that's another strong result. And then respondents noted that they think the sidewalk is an open question. That they're not really, some people were very strongly in favor of it, some people were very opposed to it, but it was talked about a lot. And I think in balance, people seemed more in favor, but it's hard to say because there wasn't necessarily a specific question about that. It was more the individual written responses that we got. Respondents noted the following future improvements of bike and walking and trails and sidewalks in the village areas. So those, again, those verbal things that people said, we like the town, but we'd like to see a little bit more pedestrian access. Those things all relate to pedestrian access. People were not interested in higher traffic volumes, and they definitely weren't interested in having more public facilities like roads to maintain. And then in open-ended responses, many people felt that speeding was an issue in Reedfield. That was a very common thing. Again, a little bit at odds with the law enforcement question. Next slide, please. So then rural economic resources. 63% of respondents felt it was very important that we preserve community-based agriculture. So again, really consistent. 85% of respondents felt that agricultural uses should be encouraged. 57% felt that local farms and agriculture should be encouraged over other businesses. So people were willing to go so far as to say, we want to prioritize these type of things. We want to potentially even incentivize them. We didn't talk about that specifically, but people said we should be doing more to make those businesses viable in town. And that's, again, a consistent message. And then when asked what specific tracts of land should be preserved, people identified large farms and farmlands as a top priority. Kept coming up over and over again. We want to preserve that acreage. And then many respondents appreciate Reedfield's rural qualities and character, natural resources, and the fact that all of these things are close to areas that aren't that way. They like Reedfield for Reedfield. They don't want us to be Winthrop. They don't want us to be Augusta. They don't want us to be Manchester. And that was really my assessment of the survey results. There is a lot more information out there. I'm sure we'll be going back and looking at these when we have policy discussions at the select board level. You know, it's really interesting, really valuable stuff. And again, I want to thank everybody who participated. And that's my piece. Yeah.
I don't have my agenda in front. Who's doing the
Dennis.
Dennis?
Hi there.
That's you.
I'm not gonna speak nearly as long as Eric did, but I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Sorry I bored anybody.
Nah, you did
I
not.
thought it was really interesting stuff.
Data is amazing, so we appreciate it. So hello, my name is Dennis Weiss. I am on the select board and a part of the comprehensive plan. And I have been sort of asked to speak about the more things change, the more they stay the same. And that includes historical and archaeological resources, transportation and public services. The idea behind this section is some things in Reedfield are the way they are, no matter what the comprehensive plan changes. And I think one of the best parts about being here is that you don't have to be from Reedfield to know how great a town it is. And part of that is from the historical legacy. I think that Dale Potter Clark would probably be better off to speak to you about this. But of course, we know that Reedfield has a rich history. We know that that history has been promoted in a number of different ways with the signs that have been posted, not only to explain the history, but also for the house signs as well. So history in and of itself of Reedfield is a major sort of part of living in town. I think also made more so by the participation of the Historical Society and the work that they do to get folks in to preserve and sort of have that. And even in this room that we meet, we have historical photos up. So it's always something interesting. You know, some highlights I like my favorite is the Jesse Lee Church. It's on the seal of the town, and it's also part of the Heritage Days logo. But things like that all throughout town, from the Union Meeting House to different homes in the library even. Some of the places that are in Reedfield are gems, and we're lucky to have them right here in our town. So that's some of the historical stuff. Transportation and public services all kind of fall. There's not a, you know, we're not building any new roads, so those sorts of things are going to stay the same. Some things in transportation I think are different, and I would defer to Elaine on this, but we know that we're doing some driving neighbors driving neighbors program through the age friendly. So ways of getting around, I think are always changing and evolving. But I think that the roads they're going on are pretty much set. And also the public services, you know, we're not adding anything. There's nothing changing in terms of public services. I think we always have a vision towards, and this is Eric saying, and I love it. It's to provide the highest level of service for the most cost-effective price. And that's what we really do when we guide towards our public services and, you know, when it comes time to do that, having that in mind. So those are the three areas of great history. We're lucky to be able to travel around Reed Field and the public services that we have. I feel like, made more efficient and increasing capacity over the years. And that's sort of the way things stay the same.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, land, water, and rural economic resources. That's great.
Me?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's my hard.
You're gonna hand it.
As one general once said, no good decision ever came from solo chair. Have to be brief, be bright, and be gone.
Good.
So anyhow, you can read the slide. One of the reasons I joined this committee was because I didn't want to become just another suburb of Augusta. And I remember when I first moved here in the late '90s, there was some outreach, and it might have been something associated with an earlier version of this. And I remember they were talking about, you know, we want to preserve open space. And I remember actually, they were looking for input and I ended up getting in an argument with some DEP attorney that was trying to get this input. And finally had to say, listen, you want input, I'm here to provide it. If you want to preserve open space, you want to promote agriculture. No one's just going to keep something open unless they're really wealthy or it's going to make money. And the other part of this motivation is in talking to farmers in town. What I found is they're really having a hard time finding help and finding labor. And so if you read through this, you'll see some language in there where we're trying to work with the schools, get an ag and forestry program going again, so we can grow our own. And then one success already we've had is that one of the institutions in town, Kent Hill School, is now a farm to table operation, which is huge because that's 300 meals a day, times 3. And I know they're working with at least one of the farmers in town, because the idea is we want to not just help the farmers we have, but make them grow the sector. That's really why, you know, I participated in this part of it. We can just keep rolling with the slide. So anyhow, that was my passion that I brought to this. Yeah, we got a lot of land, got a lot of water. Keep going. Okay. And so, what I found most useful with this plan too is that, and I'm not sure it's in this one though, it had a lot of very, very useful maps that support planning to try and help people that are in this business in terms of soil covers and things like that.
They're having a hard time hearing you on the owl, so just,
You want me to yell louder?
yes, please.
Yes, General.
I will speak louder. So anyhow, that's pretty much it.
That's,
Okay, yeah, we've done some analysis and I believe there's, we do have a new future land use map in there?
there is, it's at the end of the public
Different section,
presentation.
but I do want to point out that the soil, we have soils maps, maps of areas that are high wildlife value. All those maps that you mentioned are in there, agricultural lands, primary agricultural lands are in there. So those things are identified.
Right. Okay, and then the other thing I thought was exciting is that in the survey, because I think that there was some questions in there that related to agriculture, and as we saw, you know, a lot of people really want to see that as well, so I think that's good news for our town and good news for the future.
Thank you. Okay,
This slide is a little bit out of it. About that, we're actually here, so that's you, Matt, I'm sorry.
That's not a problem.
here we go.
So I'm gonna talk, Matt Nazar, live up here on Old Kent Hill Road. And have been in town, about 23 years now. And I joined, the comp plan, process, because, well, one, it's a professional interest. It is what I do on a daily basis at my professional job, so I find the topic interesting. But in addition to that, of course, it's a community that I've lived in for quite some time, raised my kids in, and care deeply about ensuring that it continues to be a wonderful place to live and a wonderful place for people to raise their kids. So I'm gonna talk just briefly about, this is stuff that really is not going to be issues or discussions about what the community wants or what's in the community necessarily for resources out on the ground. But this is going to talk a little bit about people and what's happened and what's changed over the course of the last 20 years in the community, because that will go towards informing what's important for community leaders to be thinking about with respect to with the populations that exist and the needs that they may have that might be different if you had a slightly different population, or how the population has changed. And then talk a little bit about a couple of the other things regarding housing and the economy that have changed as well. In this particular slide, you've got an indication that we've had essentially a population that stayed flat over the last 20 years here in Reedfield. We've got about, we had about 2,300, almost 2,400 people in the year 2000. We've got between 25 and 2,600 in the year 2020. That's not a substantial increase. There's been, so that stayed relatively flat, but there's been some very significant changes in how that population, how the demographic in the community has changed. Our median age in the community has increased fairly substantially, a little over 6.5 years since in the last 20 years. So we've got an aging population primarily in our community. That's important, again, to consider what types of services those individuals are going to start needing if you're having more and more people in the higher age groups. Total households has not changed substantially. Size of family has not changed substantially. And average household size down there at the bottom, interestingly enough, has not changed either. If you look at other communities around us, you'll find that certainly some of our more urban neighbors, and even our slightly more urban neighbors, just to our south, whether in Winthrop, household size has tended to shift down. You're getting smaller households, and so you're getting more individuals who are living alone. You're getting fewer kids. Not in Reedfield, it has not changed substantially, and it actually has increased in the last 20 years. It's gone from 2.31 as your average household size up to 2.58 based on the census. So that's an indication that we're continuing to have families in the community, and that's important again for us to think about as to what those needs are going to be. Let's go to the next slide. Let's see what we've got. This is just demographic change over time, and this is a change over a long period of time. This is the history of Reedfield from 1840 way over there on the left-hand side to 2020. You can see obviously we were a fairly agricultural community back in the 1800s when my wife's family first came to Reedfield. And then by the time we got to mid-century, early century of the 1900s, you've got a population that had largely decreased down well below 1,000 around 1930, 1940, around the Second World War, when you had a lot of the population moving into the urban areas and moving out of the rural areas, and agricultural shifting away from agriculture largely. And then a big shift between 1970 and 1980 that has largely increased since then. Where we've had a fair number of people, even though we don't want to be a suburb of our neighboring communities, a lot of people, those communities have shrunk. Augusta has shrunk, Winthrop has decreased in population. Reedfield has not. Reedfield did decrease this last census, but the trend has been up since 1970, the exact opposite trend you see in our urban communities around us. Lewiston, Auburn, and the Augusta area, Waterville area, all saw decreases in population during that time. So that population shift is important as well to think about for the town leaders as we move forward. Next one. Community profile highlights. This one actually is interesting. Some of our categories of our age demographic have changed significantly. And I'm going to jump, rather than looking at this, I'm going to look at the actual comp plan itself and a chart that I find a little easier to look at. And I'm going to point in particular to two particular age segments that I think are important for us to think about. The segment between 25 and 34 years old, has seen a substantial increase in population here in Reedfield. 63% over the last 20 years. So that age group, we're getting people who are moving into Reedfield in that particular age group. And then the other one that has increased substantially is the age group over 65. Again, not surprising, that's 53% increase over the last 20 years. So the two populations, the 25 to 34-year-old population is typically a population that's either very early in their career and just getting ready to start young families. We did see a decrease in the under 5 age category over that same 20-year period, but there's the likelihood with the increase in the population of the young family age category, the 25 to 34-year-olds, that there's going to be an increase in Reedfield in young kids. That's the likely outcome. And at the same time, the 65 and older category, very important to consider the fact that you're likely going to need to deal with some folks who have some different needs than young families do, in being able to get services, being able to move around, and a different set of needs there. So I'll leave it at that. That's our next one. Housing. Let me go back to correct. There we go. Our housing profile. Between 2009 and 2023, there was a mild or minor increase over that 14-year period in the number of total housing units. It was about, you're in the neighborhood of 30-ish, 27 new housing units. A decrease in occupied housing units. We went from 998 occupied housing units to 977 occupied housing units. That would indicate that you're likely seeing more vacation homes and second homes being constructed, or existing homes being converted to vacation or second homes being bought by people as vacation or second homes to reduce the number of occupied housing units. And a reduction in the number of owner-occupied housing units from 90% down to 80%. The median home price is up to $330,000 in 2020. It was $209,000 in 2010. Median home prices or median homes have increased 58%. And at this point, from an affordability perspective, let's go to the next slide. From an affordability perspective, 59% of households in Reedfield cannot afford the median price home. From an affordability perspective, the way that's looked at by economists is it would need to be an affordable home is a home that uses 30% of your income in order to pay for housing related costs. So your mortgage, your taxes, your insurance, those basic costs can make up to 30%. Almost 60% of the population in Reedfield cannot afford the median home here in Reedfield. That goes very much to the conversation that we found with respect to the survey that you would expect to hear from respondents being concerned about affordable housing in the community. 93% of houses in Reedfield are single family homes. 81% of renters in Reedfield are paying more than 30% of their income on housing. Again, 30% is that affordability index, that's that number. So the vast majority of individuals who are renting here in Reedfield are not renting in an affordable way. They're spending more of their income than would be considered acceptable in order for them to be able to do everything else they need to be able to do as well. So that's important to consider. And I think go to the next slide. For the local economy section, this really is talking a little bit about per capita income and labor force issues. The per capita income and household income in Reedfield have increased fairly substantially. Per capita income is 40,600. So, and the median household income is 86,000, a little bit over 86,000. Both the household income and per capita income are higher than the state and county averages. So we have an affordability concern. At the same time, we have families that are earning more than the average in the state and more than the average in the county. So that's an interesting set of statistics as well to think about from a situation as community leaders, and how those things are going to impact the residents that you're trying to deal with. Reedfield's unemployment in 2020 was 2.3%. I'm not exactly sure where we are right now, but undoubtedly quite low as well at this point, with the same thing in most surrounding communities. There was obviously an uptick just as 2020 happened during the very beginning of the pandemic, and then that really has come back over the course of the 3 years since the pandemic started. The vast majority of commuters in Reedfield, those who are going elsewhere for work, are commuting to Augusta. 27.8% of those who work outside of town are commuting to Augusta. And the second highest commuter location, which was a significant drop off, it's only 4.4%, was Lewiston. So you've got folks going two different directions. Lewiston's obviously relatively close as well. For folks who don't want to necessarily live right in the city, they're living out here instead. And then go to the next slide. Local economy highlights. The majority of the workforce here in Reedfield is either in management, business, science, or the arts. That's 57% of the population who is employed are working in one of those sectors. Another 15% is in sales and office work. 10.7% are in natural resources, construction, and other maintenance. And then production, transportation, and materials moving is another 11%. So that gives you an idea of what the general makeup of the population is here in Reedfield, what people are doing for work. And then with respect to educational attainment, which I think is the last topic I have here, is that Reedfield has a higher educational attainment than all of its surrounding neighbors. Almost 29% have a bachelor's degree or higher here in Reedfield. The next closest community that is similar is Manchester at 25%, and it continues to drop off fairly significantly from that. So that's again some, and then another 13% have some college or an associate's degree, and then 14% have a high school or equivalent. So it's a significantly more educated population here in Reedfield as well. That we have, that again, from the perspective of considering some of the things that might be important to the community and to the residents, that's something to take into account. I'll leave it at that. Yeah, you did it right. Jeez.
I'm very proud of you.
All right.
He did get the most boring piece of the second one.
So yes, teams.
All right, now we'll get to the very exciting future land use, existing and future land use. Paula.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Paula Clark. I chair the planning board and I've been participating as the planning board's representative on the comprehensive plan committee. As you already heard from Jessica, I think, the comprehensive plan is a process where you look at what you have in town, basically, the existing situation. And from that information, you assess what you have, and the planning piece of it comes next. You determine where the town needs to go and how you need to go about making any changes or staying the course, if that's what the decision is in the plan. The land use piece of the plan is particularly important because it results in an actual plan. It lays out the specific ways in which the town can address certain issues, either by making changes or by staying the course. There are a fairly lengthy list of policies and strategies that are part of the plan that address those issues. Existing land use to begin with, there are some interesting facts up on the slide, but I think principally, as you've already heard, Reedfield is primarily a residential community. We don't have heavy industry here. We have some important home occupations, small businesses, light industries. And those are all things that, as you've heard from the survey results, people want to support. They want to encourage new ones. But there really isn't a great deal of interest in heavy industry and heavy commercial use coming to Reedfield. So one of the challenges of putting this plan together is in achieving that balance between, preserving natural resources, maintaining the town's character, and encouraging additional small business and light industry. So I think people in general are interested in doing both of those things. And the plan causes us to step back and figure out exactly how to achieve that balance between the two. Also, in terms of existing land use, the majority of the development in town is obviously in the villages and in relatively recent years on the lake shores. There's been a lot of residential activity there, but the village development and the housing that's in the villages is principally began as part of the original settlement pattern in Reedfield. Those villages were settled initially and the growth happened from there. So we do see those three clusters of development in town.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Just need a clarification. So when you say housing in the villages is growing?
So what I'm talking about is existing land use and how we got to where we are essentially.
You're
So
talking about the villages, you're talking about Refill Corner and.
Reedfield Corner, the Depot and Kent's Hill.
I'm not seeing building.
I'm not talking about new construction. I'm talking about what exists and what the development pattern was and what caused us to get to where we are.
When you're saying development of housing is heavy in the villages,
There are more residences in the villages than in the rural parts,
okay.
clusters
That's
of
all I was
housing
gonna
in the
get.
villages.
Thank you.
Also, in terms of existing land use, Reedfield has a well-developed zoning scheme, and that helps to direct different types of development to different parts of the town. The land use map indicates where the growth areas are in town. Those growth areas that are designated on the map are areas that were identified in the last comprehensive plan as areas in which the town should try to direct new growth. I mean, certainly all new growth won't go there, but one of the themes of this comprehensive plan is how to the extent possible, direct growth to those areas that have been designated as growth areas. What we've seen in terms of existing land use is that really hasn't happened to a great extent. A lot of the development, particularly residential development, has been in the rural areas and not in the village areas. So part of what is presented in this plan are possible ways in which that growth can be encouraged in growth areas or directed there. Next slide.
I'm sorry, I was parsing words I'm trying to follow. So the villages is an already densely populated areas and have been for centuries. But we want a more like direct new building and new housing in those already dense populations rather than some of the outskirts. Is that what you're saying?
Some of those portions of the village areas are pretty densely developed. The last comprehensive plan, in certain areas, extended the growth areas, within the village zone, for instance. So it bumped it out a distance, and so there was additional land that was made part of that growth area. So the growth areas are not just, you know, the small portions of the individual villages. It extends out on the roads that exit the village areas, in certain cases. And if you look at the comp plan, there was some calculation that was done by Katie Cog about the amount of acreage that actually exists in those growth areas, and how much residential development is anticipated over the next 10 years or so. And it was found in very general terms that there is plenty of available space to accommodate that anticipated growth in those growth areas.
I thought you were saying we want to direct even more
Yes,
new building in the already densely populated villages.
into what is designated on the map as a growth area. The village and village residential districts are identified as growth areas, as is the academic district. And that those were designations that were actually made in the last comprehensive plan. So those have been in place, those growth areas have been in place for the past 12 years or so. And we're not proposing, as a committee, to change those at this point. The proposal is that those would remain the same.
So is the planning board doing anything about making decisions to follow that plan? I mean,
That's not within the planning board's purview. That's not something that we do. What we're talking about here in terms of the future land use plan is broader than that. There are elements that the select board would be involved in. There are elements that the planning board might be involved in. But it's a much broader townwide municipal push. It's not a planning board activity specifically.
so I guess my last question is going back to Eric and the survey and the questions that were asked. Do any of those touch on where people want to see more growth?
Absolutely. As a just time, Jessica, I'd like to make a point to what your question of Paula had said. Residents have said overwhelmingly they want to maintain the rural residential character of Reedfield. And they want to preserve farmland and open areas. The only way to do that is by not allowing, or maybe not encouraging, allowing is the wrong word, not encouraging growth in farms. Not seeing the mansions put, like, proportions of Manchester where, it's just, you've got a farm field, you've got 12 houses. And that's, we see a little bit of that in Reedfield. We have a little bit on the Fog Road. But I think people have said they don't really have an interest in continuing to see our open areas and our rural character developed in that way. So I think that there's a balance here too, though, because people have said also that they don't want to see apartments and condominiums, which are actually a good way to help preserve those other areas if they're in the right spot. But that's a kind of a different question. But in general, people had said, yes, they want to see less development in rural areas and more development in areas that where people, especially even the responses that relate to age specific, older residents seem to want to have housing stock, housing options that were close to the center of town, close to amenities. Which is what you see in other places. So there were some responses that kind of validated that approach of saying, we already have these dense areas. Let's try to keep our growth, if we can, happening in those areas so we can preserve the farms, basically.
Looks like there might have been a question.
And if I may, these kinds of things help discourage sprawl development.
I think when you look at where new houses are, not at Key Ridge and there are where people want a nice piece of property kind of away from some of the busy, but it's just like what I observed and what I'm hearing is more the development is out there.
And I think that's one of the points that's made in the comprehensive plan is that it is in fact happening. You're right. I mean, when you travel in the rural districts, yes, you see those houses popping up in farm fields and around. And one of the themes of this plan is to try to do a better job of encouraging, directing that growth, so that we have a better handle on where it goes. The plan doesn't say that a person cannot build in a rural zone. I mean, and there's nothing in here that would say that or require that growth happen in a particular area. It's more about encouraging and directing growth by putting incentives and disincentives in place to try to channel it into certain areas. It's not a prohibition.
And in addition to that, it's far more than just regulatory. It's also something that could, we've talked a lot about the fact that there's a strong desire to have agricultural uses continue to grow and be successful. And to the extent that those rural properties can continue to be profitable for the individuals who own them, they don't necessarily have to convert them to housing in order to get some finances or some funds out of it. So there's a wide variety of approaches that can be used to encourage growth to occur in certain parts of the community and less in other parts of the community. Like I said, to the extent that those properties out in the rural areas can continue to be profitable for the individuals that own them, there's less incentive to convert them to homes.
I keep hearing farmland as if we're from Indiana and Iowa, and you can see farmland as far as you can see. Now that's farmland. Here, I don't see that much active farmland where they're like stopping growing soybeans or whatever, and we're putting up some housing. A lot of the development seems like it's maybe an old farm, or it's a wooded area that someone says, wow, this is a really nice piece of property. This is where I want to put a house. So you guys keep saying, using up farmland, and I don't see it as taking away from agribusiness. It's maybe.
I think a lot of the farmland here in Greenfield is often in fodder for animals. So it's corn, dry corn for feed and hay fields.
Yeah, and I guess I would make the point that, there's probably no agribusiness here in the town. There's nothing associated with Cargill or any of these other big conglomerates. It's basically, it's sort of the way this town has developed over the last 200 years with small land holdings. And the hope is that we can retain, because once those farms are gone, they're gone forever.
How many do we have? I mean, I can think of just that. Do we have that much that I'm just not aware of?
It's detailed in the plan.
Okay.
It tells exactly how many farms there are and what they're producing.
Do you know that number? Are we talking like
I don't know off the top of my head.
10 or like 50 or, okay.
I guess all we know is
I didn't
that
get
the
that far.
residents in town would like more.
And I think some of them are not necessarily incorporated as farms, or they're used, like Tom Jacobs owns a bunch of the property on Plains Road that I think he feeds his beef cattle. His farm is in Mount Vernon, but he's doing agricultural work here.
Christensen's over by the Route 135 there. He's making it happen there. Warren Bars on
There's
the road.
elephants.
He's got beef and all of that.
Nice.
Carol just needs to get a grasp of what is described as agriculture and farming here compared to what we're used to, where you
Substantial.
go out in the middle of nowhere, and you see nothing but cornfields for miles and miles. I mean, that's to us a farm, so.
Yeah,
Part of
no,
it
let's
is
do it
just-
right here, for sure.
Although that would have been a whole lot more normal 150 years ago. I mean, that's, you look at the stone walls around here, and that's what all the stone walls are. It's changed, most definitely. Farming has definitely changed here in central Maine and in Reedfield in particular. But there's still farms, and there are farms that are being established. I mean, when I bought my home here on Old Kent Hill Road 23 years ago, there was not a farm across the street from me. There is now. That sort of thing.
Yeah, I've seen several new agriculture businesses since I moved here 12 years ago.
Right. And part of that is one of the big things that people wanted to preserve is the rural character of the town. And a big part of that is the agriculture.
That whole lot.
Throwing that word farmland around a lot tonight.
Yeah.
Because we had a lot of respondents who indicated that was something that was very important to them. So for the residents in Reedfield, whether it's something that exists today or not, it's something that's important to them.
Yeah, also there's many, in Maine, smaller farms are more the norm than large farms.
Oh.
There's more, and younger farmers, there's actually more younger farmers in Maine than any
And
other
that's
state.
one of the few growth demographics for young people in Maine. Bringing young people here to Maine is actually agriculture.
Okay,
I'm on Zoom and there's 3 questions pending.
Okay.
Oh, it's not you tonight.
Yeah, I think
so
they're.
there was a question about Factory Square, when that
Yeah,
changed.
so when did Factory Square stop being a viable economic hub? And I think it's probably in the 50s, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I think that's a question for the Historical Society,
Yeah,
and we don't have anybody. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, it was a long time ago.
Can you text her?
Yeah. And then the old Mace Farm across from Jesse Lee Church. How are you encouraging farming there with the solar power taking it over? Well, that's not quite what happened. Farming is encouraged there because 75% of that land is actually in farm easement right now. So the farmland was preserved. So that whole area around the solar farm, 25-acre solar farm, and about 80 acres in conservation, not conservation, in farmland through the Maine Farmland Trust. So that's exactly what people are talking about when they say, we want to be able to preserve that view shed, that area. That tool makes it so that area around the solar farm will forever be farmland. And if the solar farm ever stops operating, the terms of that lease or of that easement say that it goes back to being farmland. So that's actually a really good point. And although solar farm might not be the best use or the most idyllic, the fact of the matter is that actually enabled the town and really it's an asset for the area to preserve that farmland without having to spend any direct tax dollars on it. So that's fantastic. And that's exactly the type of thing that I think people are thinking about when they say they want to preserve farmland. And it is being used right now, and I expect it will probably be used more. So that's just a quick summary of the solar farm area. There has been a lot of misinformation about that. It's not just the solar farm; it's actually also agricultural land, which is fantastic. So.
Yeah. What's our middle?
Yes.
So there were 3 questions.
The one was a two-parter.
Oh,
We good?
I think so, Paula.
Okay. We'll go to the next slide. Future land use, we've talked about this to some extent. It's basically, in talking about the purpose of the comprehensive plan, the future land use plan follows a similar path as the entire plan. That's to look at what we have in town basically, and to evaluate land use trends and figure out where we need to go in the future. Next slide. So there is a specific goal for the future land use plan, and that is to encourage orderly growth and development in appropriate locations while protecting natural resources and the town's rural character. So those are themes that show up throughout the comprehensive plan, but in particular in the land use piece. We're looking at protecting natural resources, encouraging development in the right locations, and also preserving the town's rural character in that process. So what I'd like to do is just quickly run through a few of the highlights of the policies and the strategies that the plan puts forward about future land use, and some examples of the specific strategies. I mean, what are we talking about here in terms of strategies? And I won't cover all of them, but there are some examples in the bullets that come up. So one of the themes through this is growth, as we've been talking about. How do we direct growth, encourage growth in the right areas? Some of the strategies that were identified for that, first of all, is the capital investment strategy. What that looks at specifically is requiring use of capital investments by the town in growth areas. So you would not develop new municipal infrastructure or expend capital in areas where you are not encouraging that growth to happen. And so that appears as a specific strategy. Infrastructure improvements and focus on village areas, those two to some extent go together. What we're looking at there is a scenario where we would enhance the infrastructure, say in the village areas, in order to encourage growth near those areas. We're looking at things like pedestrian access, sidewalks, making things easier for people to walk around the villages and the adjacent residential areas. We might be looking at parks, public use areas, that sort of infrastructure. And the final bullet in this category is an interesting one because to me, it provides a good example of the overlap of the land use chapter with a lot of the other chapters. It really does serve as an umbrella chapter and provides an opportunity through land use to address a lot of the other topics that show up in the comprehensive plan. So this expanded use of the academic district is an idea that the committee members discussed at some length on a number of occasions. And that is the possibility of opening up what is currently a fairly restrictive academic district to allow its use for more housing. We've heard about housing. There's a lot of interest in additional housing in the town. It's a problem. People are looking for housing. And one possible way, and it's only one way and a small way, is to open up that academic district and to allow additional housing opportunity in it. So that's something that will have to be discussed a lot further. But in general, that's what we're looking at there.
Well, what does that mean?
So
Exactly
currently,
what area are you talking about?
currently there are 3 areas in town that are zoned academic. Around the elementary school, around the high school and middle school complex, and in Kents Hill. And probably the most potential for housing would be up in Kents Hill. We talked about such things as vacant housing that's owned by Kents Hill School and the possibility of opening that up for other use, depending on what it is and when and how it's available, but trying to make use of housing that might be available but unused. It could, I suppose, turn into opportunity for additional housing, but as you can see, each of those 3 academic zones is quite different, and probably most of the potential lies in one way or another in Kents Hill.
There's really no place by the high school that is available.
No, probably not. As I said, this is something that needs a lot more discussion, I think, in terms of exactly how it would be applied. And the most obvious examples that come up in our past discussions were in the Kents Hill area.
And those discussions were with one of our fellow board members who is here this evening, Christine, who's the head of school there.
Did we miss a slide?
No, I just wanted to bring up the map. I thought I might
Oh, okay.
help.
Okay. One other major point, a theme in the future land use plan is the protection of natural resources and rural character. And this is a theme, as we've talked about tonight, that's woven throughout the plan, but it shows up in particular in the future land use plan. The first bullet here is the possible designation of a rural resource district. This actually was an issue that was raised in the past comp plan 12 years ago. And upon discussion, it was decided that it would be a good idea to include it in the current comp plan. And what that would do would give the town the ability to designate certain parts of town with this district designation, where we're looking to protect certain features or certain resources. And farmland is one of those. I mean, potentially you could designate farmland as a resource protection district. And the standards in that district would be different than just the straight rural district or some of the other districts in town. Wetlands, possibly. Another example would be significant wildlife habitat, scenic view sheds, those types of areas that in general people are interested in applying some additional protections to. Again, it's a concept only at this point. There are no particular areas that have been identified, and it would have to be talked through a lot further before it was determined exactly, if and how it could be implemented. Secondly, and we've talked about this already, directing growth away from rural areas and sensitive natural areas. And that falls into the category of the incentives and disincentives with regard to encouraging growth in certain areas and discouraging it in others.
How do we discourage? Like, what's an example of a way we could discourage growth in an undesirable area?
Well, I think the whole notion of putting capital investments into areas where you want to encourage growth and not into other areas. I mean, I suppose you could look at that, from either direction. Either it's an incentive or a disincentive. But and I think if we do that with a lot of the different examples that have come up. But as Matt mentioned, there are many different ways that are used in a land use context to try to encourage or discourage development in certain areas. I don't know if there are any that are especially common in your view, Matt, but
I think that's the kind of thing you would dig into on the select board and on the planning board in the future,
But I thought Eric shared a slide saying resoundingly people don't want us to spend capital in town. I thought that
No,
was something to that nature, that we don't want any more.
they don't want any more roads. They don't want the town building any more roads.
I was waiting for that, something about spending more capital.
I
I don't know.
don't recall. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's,
Okay.
I'd have to look back at the slides, but, I think that generally speaking, people were wanting to see investment, in areas, like outdoor recreation facilities and things like that. But,
they didn't want municipal
they
buildings.
didn't want municipal buildings. They don't want more buildings. And that's no more buildings, no more roads.
And, another piece that did come up, and I think probably this the final bullet in this category might better fit in the conversation about designated growth areas, but there is a lot of support for recreational opportunities and for continuing to enhance those. That might be encouragement for people to actually build or develop in particular parts of town, depending on the availability of those recreational opportunities.
Can I ask a question? You mentioned focus on areas in which you want to have special, relationship with the rural areas and I guess residential areas where you're going to protect certain facilities or resources. I think I read in the plan where you were talking about historical resources. That they would be protected or historic zones would be set aside. Is that something that you're interested in?
Well, the plan does address historic resources in town. What I was talking about here has more to do with natural resources.
Yeah.
But there certainly is a section of the plan that addresses historic resources.
Have you discussed that tonight?
It did come up, yes.
Oh, we did?
Yeah.
Oh, then I'm sorry. I got a call from my grandchildren and it couldn't be, and I did want to. Yes, I'm sorry. Okay.
The next piece, the plan does call for tracking growth and development in town. That's something that there was a lot of interest in, that we should actually be tracking the development that occurs so that we can understand the rate of development and the types of development that are happening in town. And if for some reason it's different than what the town expected or planned for, there's always the opportunity to look at that data and talk about whether adjustments are necessary. And finally, there is a piece in the plan about the importance of evaluating the land use ordinance in terms of the comprehensive plan to make sure that its provisions ultimately are consistent with what the plan calls for and the directions that the town has approved moving forward in. So at some point that would happen and the land use plan would be evaluated and possible revisions proposed to make it consistent to achieve the goals that were in the plan itself.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last revision? So what were you saying? The land use ordinance?
The land use ordinance will be evaluated in the context of the comprehensive plan to make sure that the ordinance is consistent with the goals and the policies of the comprehensive plan. It may be already, but there may be some new things that the town undertakes and that might require ordinance revisions to be consistent.
Thank you, John. Is that?
Can I have clarification? When you talk about encouraging development, and you say encouraging development in certain areas, are we encouraging development or the development that comes, we want to encourage in a certain area? Do you understand what I'm saying? Are we trying to get people to come here? Is that the plan? Or are we just trying to encourage what development happens to a certain area?
Yeah, you know, I
Does that
think
make sense?
I get it. You know, I think that there are, what we're talking about here in this land use piece is primarily, you know, where the development should go, how it should be developed, that kind of thing. And the other piece that you're talking about is generally encouraging development to come to Reed Field.
Mhm.
And I think that there are other things that the town's engaged in, that like the enterprise committee, for instance. I mean, those kinds of efforts work more on that part of the equation.
Right, I definitely think there are pieces of the plan, this particular chapter is about land use and the ordinances that we build around land use, but there are definitely parts of the plan that talk about things like the enterprise committee, like having the services that people need so that they want to live in this town, making the town a pleasant place to live or do business. That would encourage that.
So Dave, to answer your question more succinctly, I guess, what she's talking about is encouraging growth in certain areas and not encouraging growth overall.
Yeah, and actually put it another way, it's what Paula has talked about is where growth occurs, not if growth occurs. There are other portions of the plan that do talk about if growth occurs and what type of growth should occur. But what Paula has described here is just where that growth would occur.
Would be
And
encouraged.
we talked a little bit about that earlier. We talked about, in the survey, there was conversation about, the things that people wanted in the community, things like, cafes and restaurants and grocery stores, those sorts of things. Gas stations, as Eric has mentioned, that's something that, and comes up repeatedly that, doesn't exist here in town anymore. So those sorts of things, there may be, the enterprise committee may be actively seeking out some of those things and seeking them out and suggesting that if they want to come to Reedfield, that they would go in the places that the plan talks about.
I do think it's important to add to that, a third element, and that is that in all of this, as we look at the strategies that we're putting out there and looking at any potential ordinance changes as a result of the plan, one of the things that is in the front of everyone's mind is trying to make sure that what we do doesn't, discourage what you're suggesting.
Right.
We're very mindful that there are certain, regulations that could discourage development generally. And everyone is very mindful and cautious about that as we talk about this.
Speak about encouragement, discouraging. I have another question. In this ordinance that you prepared, I seem to remember, and I went through it, I did go through a good part of it, but there was a line in which it said that the factory square area would not be recognized as a historic district. Is that so? It just is declared not a historic district?
I don't know the answer. I didn't work on that section.
I don't know,
The only historic district in Reedfield is in Kents.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
The only historic district in Reedfield is in Kents Hill. There's no other official historic districts.
No, I understand that.
we don't, yes, I don't think that Reedfield has designated historic districts
No.
outside, like, we don't have there's not even a way for us as a town to do that at this point, like a legal framework for us designating historical districts. That would be a state.
No, I understand that. What
Yeah.
I'm saying is asking,
Okay,
and I may be wrong, but I seem to remember or recall a line in there in which the districts, it stated that the factory square area was not a historic area.
could you find that part?
I could, and I'll read it again and send you a
You
reference to
can
that.
absolutely do
That
that,
would
but
be-
I'm just, you seem to remember, and
Fine.
if you can find the language, then maybe we can talk about it, but.
Yeah, right, okay,
Okay,
all right.
thanks, Paul.
The thing that I'd like to add is I want to make sure that it said that this is not an ordinance that's being passed.
It isn't an
This is
ordinance.
not an ordinance. This is a policy document that could lead to future ordinances. This is not an ordinance that will regulate anybody's property.
I understand that, but if someone were to suggest an ordinance that suggested a historic zone, and this document says it doesn't exist, that would be sufficient to negate it. You do understand what I said?
Yes, I
Okay, yeah, so that's why I'm concerned about the document itself and its statements that it makes. If there are declarative statements within it that eliminate any possibility, that would be of concern. But you say that there were none, and
No, I
I'll
did not.
refer-
I want to be clear that I did not say that there
Yeah,
were.
no, you don't recollect any.
I don't know of any right now. No, I
Yeah,
cannot recollect.
I'll look at it again. Yeah, thank you.
You're all done with your piece?
Yes.
Thank you, and that was the end of our slideshow. I would love to open it up for any questions that folks might have at this time that we didn't already answer. Anybody on the Zoom have questions?
No.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
I'm ready. I don't much have questions. Sorry.
Brandon, people at home barely hear us, do you mind
Yeah, if you wanted to stand up here, this is the microphone there, if you speak towards it, it should be like.
You're right.
Thanks, Carol.
Well, it'll be in the suits.
Okay. So, this is your plan.
Yeah.
All 278 pages.
It's a big topic.
Have any of you read it all? All, there's, I can't even read what I wrote. So. There's a lot of work went into this, and I appreciate that. But there's some scary things in here. There's some really good things. I feel like this is a, you say it has no teeth, it has a growl, it has a real growl. I can see a lot of ordinances coming out of this. There's a lot in here about a big push for organic, which is fine, but I'm afraid that it's gonna affect conventional farms. I can see ordinances coming out of that. You have stuff in here about right of ways on private land. And you don't have right of ways on private land, but you state that you do. So a little proofreading would be good. There's a lot in here about old homes, you don't feel they're being properly cared for. Expensive. Upping your taxes doesn't help you fix your house. So, you all want to protect a lot of land, I suggest you buy land. You can do anything you want with it there, provided you don't pass a lot of ordinances. But don't buy land with my money. Buy your own land. You guys pool your money to buy land. You talk about legacies all the time. Go buy one. I wanted more land. I got a second job. I bought more land. You can do that. You don't need my money. So you did a lot of work, and I appreciate that. But there's a lot in here that shouldn't be in here. That's all I got.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, please, come on board. So, 298 pages, I believe completed on May 1st. And we have a month before we vote on it. I've been out of commission, I had hip replacement a week ago, so I've had lots of time on my hands, and I tried to read the whole thing, and I got like maybe on page 130. And I'm taking little bits and pieces on this document, going, that's something I want to look back on, or I want to look in depth more, or it raises more questions, or it's raises concerns, or I want to talk to people about it. And there's stuff that just come from right out of left field about Carlton Pond, Maranacook Lake, Torrey Pond, archaeological areas should receive professional archaeological surveys. It's like,
Pretty sure that was in 2009.
it goes on and on about that. No, it's in here.
Yeah, no, but it was, that's a carryover from the last one.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's still, it should be like, maybe even one liner, but it goes on and on and on about archaeological importance and surveys. So I'm finding it impossible for people to digest adequately 298 pages by June 13th. So the last plan was 2009. You guys had 2 years to put it together. We just got it in its finality 2 weeks ago. I don't know what the rush was to say we have to get it on the ballot this June. It's very incomprehensible to expect the people of a document with this much weight and this much importance and this much work involved to say up or down, June 13th, you're gonna decide. And then we're gonna go by it, and now this is our doctrine. Take it or leave it. My thought is to leave it because I don't have adequate time to really digest it with people. Some of the things that I did see, exactly what Brandon said, about 80%.
Okay, hold on for a second.
Yeah,
Maybe someone can address
the timing,
the
sure.
timing piece
Feel free.
and why is what it is.
Well, I mean, one piece I will say is we've been having public meetings for 2 years on this, where we've, been very open about it. It's not like we've been doing this work in secret just to place this plan in your hands. A bunch of it has been on the website for months. So yes, there's a few final pieces that went on, but you've had access to a lot of this plan for months and months. And months. And the other piece I would say is that it's going to a vote, so absolutely, if you don't feel comfortable with it as it is, that's your choice and your choice.
There just was some things, 50% of the homes built in Reedfield are after 1880. And not, so only those were built to modern codes, and it does talk about so many of them not being well insulated. I think a lot of us struggle with just maintaining the older homes, and in this economy and fuel, we would all love to insulate more, but it's just, we only have the resources. So, I don't know, I guess for that piece, like, is there a prescription in that piece that says we're gonna make people insulate? I think it was more of a statement of this is not.
this is a fact of everyone's lives, right? That a lot of us are living in older homes that don't have the insulation that probably any of us want. We both live in old homes, right?
Mhm.
So
But
a
it
lot of
wasn't
this
like all
is a
pointing
statement
out
of
this-
sort of
yeah.
the facts and
So what's the
figures
issue, Carol,
around
with
our.
Insulation in the homes.
It was just pointing out all these things that we should be doing better, and just keeping in mind that people are stretched about as thin as they can be. And we're just making a lot of generalizations of, well, this is really a problem, and you're not saying we have to solve it. It is what it is. This is Maine, we're an old state. I think you're gonna find that no matter where you go in the state.
But I think that that's sort of what a comprehensive plan is there to do, is to sort of make a list. I mean, it's a list of data and what like the situation is in our town. I don't know that that piece is prescriptive at all in terms of forcing people to do things or asking them to. I think it would more, if we're gonna use that piece to promote anything, it would be, let's look at options for getting people better insulation in their homes. Can we find them? There's often state projects that will help people go into people who have lower income, help them winterize homes, things like that. Like, that's the kind of takeaway that I would take from that piece, is how can we as a community help each other?
I think it's also really important to recognize the way the plan is set up. There are chapters that cover certain topic areas. And most of the narrative in those chapters is descriptive. It's describing what we have, what the circumstances are. And then there's a portion that's devoted to like policies and strategies. So given all the things we've talked about, here's what policy we think we should put in place, and what we should do about it. That's kind of separate and apart from the narrative, from the assessment piece of this. And so what we're looking at is the actual actions that could be taken are in that policy and strategy.
And I think we also talk about the fact that there could be a condensed version of this or an abridged version of this that folks might actually read, but we haven't gotten that far.
Well, what I've encouraged folks to do is to read the goals and strategies section rather than the chapter. I mean, the chapters are great. I love it. I'm a data, well, I love the data, but there's nothing in the descriptive chunks of the chapters that is prescribing specific actions. That's all stuck in the goals and strategies sections. So if we're looking at like what's actually gonna come across the select board's table as a proposed ordinance, that's gonna come out of those goals and strategies. And that, I think, is only 40 pages, 35 pages. It's a much smaller chunk of the document. But the rest of it is really, it's state mandated that we, every 10 years, we take a look at the numbers and we write them down in a document. And we say, this is where all our lakes are. This is how many people live here. This is how old they are. Like, all of that stuff has to be in there, and it adds up. It's a lot of data for sure.
And when you look at the policies and strategies piece, one more important point about that, I think, is that they're specific about what we can do about a certain topic area, but many of them simply say, explore the possibility of doing X or evaluate doing Y. So they're not really prescriptive either. It's not assumed that anything in that list will necessarily happen. It would have to go through a regular process before it did.
In many cases, it also says that we would try to educate our residents as to how to deal with some of the issues. Because as a small town, we do not have the answers and the resources to solve all of these issues, but we can help educate. And that's been a big component from the age-friendly perspective. These problems are larger than what the town of Greenfield can fix.
Glad to hear that, Elaine, right?
Right.
Because sometimes people get all excited about a very specific personal issue. We've got to fix this because this happened. And it's like, we can't solve everybody's problems and we can't. Someone went dry, said, I'm really sorry, but that's not really a town problem. The word really, even just from the get-go, the vision statement, just a couple that really don't seem to follow the survey. Work to acquire additional conservation land as it becomes available. I think resoundingly, people said we have enough protected space. And I know one of the overarching observations were it's ideal to have more than 10% or at least a minimum of 10% of a town secured or protected. And it said Greenfield's doing a great job because we've got more than that. We had 12%. And they didn't see a need to do more than that. That we have 12%, 2,500 acres, but yet it talks about acquiring additional conservation land when it becomes available in our vision statement. Support local agriculture through protection of farmland and encourage local agribusiness, which I guess was my question. And one of the things, so if you're saying somebody has many acres, they bought it years ago. Now they don't want that many acres and they want, and somebody wants to, a developer wants to come in and they say, I don't want this many acres again, but it's previous farmland. Are they going to be discouraged from, okay, you're going to take these 10 acres that I have here and make it a couple of smaller lots? I don't, when you say protecting farmland, and that's one of our visions, but it's people's private property. Okay, it's historically used for something maybe, but that's where I have a problem with. We have a goal of protecting farmland.
You know,
Is that a scenario?
again, this is not a prescription, so the select board and the town residents are gonna decide what that means and how, and how that looks, but I think we should, as a community, try to protect farmland. I mean, we might disagree on that, but
I tend to be, if it's your property and you're having trouble paying for the taxes of all of that.
and we can't, and at this, I mean, there's nothing I can do to stop somebody from
Right.
selling that property. It's their
Would
property.
you if you could? Would you if you could?
I mean, depends on what they wanna sell it to do.
Doesn't matter.
I mean, if
If I
somebody
had to
wanted,
sell
if
my
somebody
thing-
wanted to sell the field next door to my house and open, like an airport there,
If they want.
they wouldn't be able to do that, right? There are ways, I don't wanna get in the weeds on this,
No,
but
if I would decide I want to turn my pasture and help off,
yes, I cannot stop you from doing that.
would you if you could?
I wouldn't be happy about it.
Would you buy it?
If I had the money, yeah. I don't know, I don't have the kind of money to buy up all the empty property and maybe, I mean, again, like, these are questions that I'm not the king of Reedfield, I can't. I can't tell you what you're taking with your property.
It's really important to understand that there's nothing in this comp plan that is going to take away the rights of property owners to manage their property. Some of the mechanisms that we're talking about are, are there things that we could encourage people with to maintain their farmland versus turn it into house lots? And there might be policies that the town could adopt that would encourage people to do that. But there's nothing in the plan that would say you can't use your property the way you want to use it.
Other than what already exists.
Other than
Again,
the
there are
zoning
there are
and the
absolutely laws about what you
regulations,
can and cannot do.
but-
with your property.
you know, it doesn't take away property owner rights. The comp plan does not do that.
And it's
Until you write an ordinance, doing exactly that.
And that may be correct. If the community decides to write an ordinance and as a community adopts it at town meeting, it could have an impact on your property. That's not any one person in this room making a decision, that is town meeting making a decision.
I understand.
Are you talking about ballot town meeting, when you say meeting?
That is.
Not just like a select board meeting or a planning board
Ballot
meeting,
town meeting.
a town.
That is how ordinances are changed in this
Good.
community.
Okay, and encourage new eco-friendly development in the area, the corners, the town hall, Reedfield Library, post office. What does that mean, eco-friendly businesses, like, unless they're eco-friendly, they're not a desirable business? So I think,
When we talk about encouraging
Yeah, I think in some way we're talking about semantics here. We're talking about encouraging certain things. That doesn't mean we're prohibiting anything. So as a community, this sort of reflects, yeah, this is what we'd like to see. This is what we'd like to have here. You know, if someone wants to open up a strip club over there somewhere. Okay. Go through the process that you normally go through. But all this really does is sort of express you know, the folks that have been involved in this, most of whom are on other town committees and volunteering their time to do these things. And with conversations that a lot of other people have, that sort of reflects that. I guess you could say, approach to the vision statement and other things. But it's not just one person.
It can be used.
It could.
That
Yes.
could be used, eco-friendly, it could be used as a tool to limit businesses and say, you know, as a planning board,
ordinance, correct?
if I were to write, if the town were to write something, so, let's say you were to write a petition. And they say, well, this is not eco-friendly, it has to be, a petition must be it must follow the comprehensive plan. If it doesn't, then it cannot be law, legally made an ordinance. So that means that the word eco-friendly will be used to deny a petition or any ordinance that by a lawyer, by a town lawyer, who will say, you know, this is something we can't do.
So we're getting a little far afield.
We're not getting far afield, this is
Yeah.
exactly what's happening. in this town.
Can someone address that? Because, you know,
So I think, I mean, again, this is a semantics question when we're saying we want to
Semantics
encourage,
is real,
Bob,
yes, just,
What?
yes.
can you let me finish my sentence?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think when we, with the word encourage, right, was in there. Was there any there's no language prohibiting certain kinds of business. So I don't think legally there's any way that we could say, no, you can't because. But under Matt,
It
do you
could
have
be
any?
used as preference.
I
Like, look at this as a.
All right,
it's
that's,
like a-
I'm fine, and we could, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time, we don't want to do that. But I've experienced that, and that's one of the things that I would be concerned about. But I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry to have interrupted or joined in.
Oh, appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, other stuff.
I guess, and then, like, it says actual general recommendations, and again, this is in the preamble, page 10, create and promote energy efficient housing, leverage energy efficiency ordinance, and find other partnerships to promote energy efficiency. So just stuff like that seems,
What's your, do you have a specific issue with? Like encouraging energy efficiency in the document?
well, the pendulum can swing too far. When you talk about, sorry, you can't have your gas stove, stuff like that. I think the pendulum can swing a little far.
I mean, I think that the language clearly was about helping people be more energy efficient if they desire to, right?
Well, leverage energy efficiency ordinance, the main word ordinance, and I'm like, I'm hoping we don't go there.
We actually already have an ordinance, and what it does is allow residents to borrow money for energy efficiency improvement projects at a lower interest rate through the efficiency main program. So it's actually a way to help residents save money.
We don't have an ordinance saying thou must.
No, of course not. It's completely
It's just that
voluntary. It just puts out resources to help
You
people
say
save money.
that again. Eric, what that ordinance
It's
says.
called, it's a PACE ordinance. It was adopted several years ago. It basically says that the town is interested in helping our residents have energy efficient homes to save money on heating costs and things like that. One of the perks of that is that towns that have adopted that ordinance, residents are allowed to borrow money at a lower interest rate to finance projects if they choose to. So all this is a way to help people save money and not spend so much on heating their homes.
Especially people of limited means.
Well, anybody.
So on that topic, I just have a little question and kind of like, I think where Carol's concern is going. I did hear in the news recently that a town put an ordinance in that everybody had to use electric yard equipment. So like your mowers had to be an electric, your weed whackers, your blower, everything had to be electric. So I think, you know, at least that's what I kind of grab on what Carol's worried about ordinances being set for eco-friendly and that kind of thing. So is that something that you guys ever want to even dabble in?
None of us
Okay.
in our positions here have any power to do that. Yeah, I mean, like, that's, you know, Carol has a lot more power to make ordinances than I do, because she sits on the select board and I don't, right? So.
So I think that's where some of the fear comes along is that, you know, there is legit like a town that's literally made that an ordinance, and nobody except for companies that come and do the lawn landscape.
So, but the voters actually approved that.
I don't know.
It's South Portland, and at this point, they're not.
It is not been done.
And then one thing when we talk about agribusiness, it's a tough gig. I was really saddened the other day, went to go buy my pollinators at Alvin's and was told they're not doing vegetables because Alvin's retiring. I'm like, oh. It's a tough gig, and I spent quite a bit of time talking to the barters about when they used to have dairy and used to have cattle, and dairy was very economical and they did very well, and then it just became a very tough means to make a profit, and so now they're doing the beef. So, and it's just a lot of hard work, early mornings and very physically hard work. I don't know if I see Gen Zs and all these Gen X people really wanted to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and doing all that. So it just seems we can promote agribusiness and all that stuff. I hope people continue to do that. But it's,
Maine's a leader in young farmers, like we really are. We are.
I hope so.
Success story actually in Maine.
It's really good. Oh, yeah. Thank you. And then also, I'm sorry, the one thing, I'm just gonna read it and we don't need conversation about it. Develop plans for a refilled community center. And so I think that's our goal and something hopefully will come absolutely soon. Thank you. Okay.
One quick question.
Yeah.
You said, it states in here that the privately owned roads and repair are the public better right away.
Yeah, Eric, it's page 94, 95 on the transportation.
Is that,
It's a very,
page 93.
93.
Well, you know more about it, Greg. I mean, I guess generally speaking, we don't have rights of way on private roads. I don't know why I would say that unless it's a specific example, like the Old Town Farm Road that runs through.
Eric, it's in the transportation chapter.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things that the sentence that doesn't need to be in there, because it talks about it's other roads, section on other road. And it talks about, and it's related to private roads and approved subdivisions, period. And then it talks about public access to private roads. It's like, I don't even know why that sentence has been there. Because it's one of those things you think can aggravate me.
Yeah, well, it could be a non sequitur, it could be an error, but.
Yeah, would you like me to read that section?
Yeah, please do.
Why don't I read it?
Other roads on page 94. Other roads include over 100 privately owned roads throughout town. The most common of these roads are camp roads. Camp roads provide access to waterfront properties and do not form a part of the public road network. These roads were named during the street addressing project. Other privately owned roads in Reedfield include roads inside of approved subdivisions that have not been offered to or accepted by the town. Period. The public has a right of way over these roads, but the town of Reedfield has no legal right or obligation to maintain them, including culvert replacement or snow plow.
I don't understand why we even need that sentence in there, really.
There may be some of those.
People might read that and think, oh, if I own one. And think, oh, I can go down his road.
And right after that.
Well, yeah, it's looking up the case, yeah.
Eric, right after that paragraph, it lists all of those roads.
So those could be the subdivision roads, and
No,
it
these
might,
are all of the other privately owned
Yeah,
roads.
there's Farmer
Every
subdivision,
private road in Reedfield.
Broadview Heights subdivision
Yeah.
is one of them.
so
Fire
I'll just say that, that's an error, and, it's unenforceable, it's, again, I don't know why that says that.
It might
Will
be
it get
carried.
deleted?
It will be deleted in the next plan, but it's not something that we can, this has already been submitted to the town meeting vote and all that. There are probably other issues like that in this plan, it's a large document, but I guess that the intent isn't to try to find a way to give public access. This document wouldn't do that anyway, it doesn't give people any rights that they don't already have.
It states that they have that.
Well, but that's an error. And I'll just say it on record, that's an error. Private roads are private road. It doesn't change the law, it doesn't change anything. It's just, apologize that that's in there. This looks like a small error in the text.
So it can't be stricken from what we're,
No, we've already moved it, and we've already got all the warrants. The select board approved those weeks ago, and it's all.
we approved them before the document was, and the land use ordinance was
That's
the
not
last. part.
Correct, it was, you approved the final document. So there was an error in there, and it's a large document, little things like that sneak through. We will correct it the next time around, but it doesn't, again, it doesn't change the law, it doesn't give people rights, it doesn't give anybody rights to access private road.
Unless they actually go on that road and say they have a private right. A right to
That's
actually be on that road.
completely inaccurate, Bob, that's just false.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
You're
they
wrong.
can say it's false, but they do.
No, they don't, Bob, you're wrong, just
But
let it
that's the
go.
problem of the landowner who actually owns it, and it becomes
I'm
his
not- I
problem.
can't have
that he
this
has to-
conversation with
So
the-
let me back this up a little bit. So it's within the context of. It follows a sentence of private roads in approved subdivisions.
Subdivisions, yeah.
That was the intent. It's a screw up, no question. It could even be in there.
No, I understand.
And thank you, Brennan, for tweezing through this and finding that.
Okay, anything else? Thank you. We've been at this a long time. I appreciate everybody coming, everybody who's on the Zoom. Thank you.
Before you close the slideshow, can you leave them up, because I wanted to ask the gentleman about the age percentages that were up. There was a list of the different age brackets of adults in the town.
Mhm.
And I'm just curious on how those percentages are, because there was like something that was like 60% was this age, 50 something was this age, and then there were other percentage. So how is that percentage actually figured?
I think it's based on census data, the
Right,
demographics.
but what's the 100 that we're taking those percentages from? Like,
Right, I think it was, the, on that slide, as I remember, it was the change.
That's a percent change.
It was the
Oh, okay.
percent change over
Percent change over
the 10 years.
20 years.
20
Percent change over 20 years.
thank you. I couldn't understand that. And I just wanted to-
Yeah.
Are you good? You don't
I'm good. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going, do I need to call for I don't think I even called this meeting to order tonight. Do I need to call for a motion
Yeah, you
to
do it all,
adjourn?
all at once.
Anyone?
Motion to adjourn?
Yes, seconded.
Excellent, all in favor? Hey!
5 minutes.